In this video, I'm going to lay out a practical approach for you to improve your singing voice for free with the tools that you have in front of you. This is Get Skill, and let's get better at singing. This system has led to a lot of improvement for myself. I went from being an automatic reject at any singing audition. I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes, to being someone who would probably just get skipped over in the audition process. I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes, singing to Tiny Dancer, and I miss the way you make me feel. It's real when we watch the sunset over the castle on the hill. Not the worst, not the best, but I would say that you can't argue that it's been an improvement. So let's talk about how I got that improvement, how you can too, and what I wish somebody had told me 2 years ago when I first started. So I'm going to be reading from my script right here, but if you want to check out the full article, link that in the description below. So you want to improve your singing voice, but how? $1 million question right there. This has been the hardest part of teaching myself how to sing. Something that after months of voice lessons, hundreds of hours of YouTube videos, and over 2 years of recreational practice, I still felt a confusion over what I should work on. If you look up singing exercises on YouTube, you're going to find dozens of teachers giving you different sounds to say as you move up and down scales. But these exercises can seem random, like you're poking at a silk sheet in the breeze, sometimes hitting it, but not sure of your progress or your purpose. The problem I found is that these singing instructors never lay down a solid theoretical approach for why these exercises would help or how to recognize what your problem is in the first place so you can decide what you should focus on improving. Instead, you end up just squawking in your room endlessly, hoping no one hears how ridiculous you sound as you go up and down scales. So for this video, I want to lay out a theory of singing that I hope guides your development. This right here is what I wish I had 2 years ago when I started. There are 3 levels of control that you are going to progress through. There is pitch control, muscular control, and voice control. Let's go over each one of them in detail. Pitch control is learning how to tell if you're hitting a note with accuracy. It focuses on training your ear and mental ability. So here, be able to hit that with resonance. Exercises include sliding, pitch matching, as we just did, learning melodies, riffs, interval jumps, and harmonies. Muscular control is all about gaining conscious control over your breathing and the 4 main components of your throat to strengthen them while extending your range. Exercises include singing specific sounds with a certain focus on tension, doing transition exercises between 2 sounds, monitoring your throat and belly as you go up and down scales. And this is what most singing advice on YouTube focuses on. Voicing control is all about controlling your voice to give a certain impression or character to deliver a certain sound. This is where you practice singing songs, developing different character impressions, practicing your timbre or your tone, and optionally training for performances. Now, these levels are different lenses to frame your training through. However, we want to practice all of these together as they have a strong influence on each other. The lower levels lay a supporting foundation to allow you to gain greater control over the next level, while the high levels will shape and reveal weaknesses in the lower levels. For example, as you train your pitch control to be able to hear a note with accuracy, you're able to take that ability over to your muscular training to make sure that you're staying on pitch. And as you gain muscular control, you're going to be able to change the sound that you're presenting with your voice to create whatever sound that you want. But when you struggle with a certain voicing, you're going to find yourself going back to your pitch control to try to work on hitting the notes with accuracy, or your muscular control to extend your range or to reduce the tension there. All of these have that interlinked component, and therefore we want to practice them together. Let's go ahead and jump into this first one, pitch control. How do you improve your pitch control? Well, there are several exercises that I've already listed, but let's go ahead and go into probably this one that I would recommend everyone should start with, pitch matching. This is simply learning what being on pitch feels like in our body. I wish that I had started here. Most of the singing advice you see on YouTube is way too advanced because if you don't know what being on pitch sounds like, how do you know if you're going to be able to be on pitch when you're going up and down scales? This right here is going to teach you that 1, you can sing. That's going to build some confidence. 2, that singing feels good. And 3, that your practice does not need to be complicated at the start. So here's what you're going to need. A piano or a piano app on your phone. Anything that can produce a sustained note while you sing will work for this. You can check the link in the description for links to every major platform, including some free web apps. You also might want a visual pitch monitor to be able to tell what note you're holding. So if I do a ooh, you can see that right there was around an F sharp 3. So after you've got your tool set up, next is to click on a note, any note, and to try to match it with any sustained sound. It can be an ah or a do or just you humming. And if you don't hit it right away, I recommend sliding up and down in your pitch. So you're going to and eventually you're going to find that it just locks into place. Where if you're on that pitch correctly, you feel this resonance inside your head and this humming in the air, which should feel good. And that is the sound that's produced from your throat mixing in the air with the sound, the frequency of the air vibration that's coming from the piano. Now, if you're having a hard time hearing this, what I recommend doing is opening up your pitch monitor, singing a note in your normal speaking voice, around a C3, and that should help you with that as well. Again, check the link in the description. I've linked all of those below, and I recommend that you pause the video right now and go ahead and try this exercise yourself. I'll be here when you get back, and we're gonna be going over muscular control. So this might have been your first foray into singing practice, and you might have found several things. It's one that was harder to hit the pitch than you thought, that it felt different than you were thinking, or that you might have found this exercise to be effortless. No matter what it is, this could be where your singing practice stops. You could just simply take this same exercise and apply it up to learning melodies. I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes. So once you can hit the pitches with the instrument assist, then you can work on hitting them without the cue. So you sing them first. And make sure that you are able to do that without needing the instrument to cue you first, because you aren't going to have an instrument to cue you when you're singing. And then you can practice this across melodies until you can hum on pitch the entire melody. You could add some words in at that point, and your singing practice could stop there. You don't need to do anything else if you're just trying to be able to sing, I don't know, like a lullaby to your kids at night on pitch. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. However, as you do this, you might find that your voice isn't as rich or as strong as you'd like. It might sound strained or shrill or crack, especially if you're reaching outside your range. And this is where muscular control comes into play. Muscular control! So, while you're working on developing your ear, which is what pitch control, again, is all about, you realize that just because you can hear that you aren't doing something right doesn't mean that you can necessarily correct it or have the ability to fix it. This is why we want to work on developing conscious control over the throat and the breath, or your singing musculature. You've been using these muscles unconsciously for years to be able to speak. So to further yourself, we need to be able to develop conscious control of them so you can become a better singer. And let's start off with breath. It's often considered the most important part of singing, compared to the engine of a car. I'd like to balance that by saying that, remember that the engine of a car is just a component. It is an important component, but it doesn't make the car move on its own. So you can't just train your voice and expect that you will become a fantastic singer. However, it is a good foundational piece to talk about. So I'm gonna make this as simple as I can, and I'm going to be linking information in the full article below if you wanna go ahead and check out any of these sources or learn about this more in depth. So let's talk about breath, the engine of your voice. When you inhale, your diaphragm contracts, pulling your lungs down and expanding their volume. That causes a slight decrease in pressure, which the air rushes in to fill. Your lungs are being stretched actively though, and they want to return to normal. They're like a balloon that's been filled up, and the tension in them is going to naturally force the air back out. So when you exhale, your diaphragm is actually relaxing, and it's a passive process, or at least it can be. You also can force air out. For example, when you cough, your abs will contract to accelerate that process and force air out of your lungs more rapidly. In singing, the most common recommended way to breathe is with diaphragmatic breathing, where you breathe into your belly and then out with your belly. You aren't lifting your lungs or your chest because that causes an additional weight on your lungs. That means that you have less control. Instead, we want to go for this 360 belly breath, where we feel our belly expand, our ribs expand, and our lower back expand all at the same time without our chest moving. And we can practice that right now. Go ahead and just go and keep breathing like this while I talk. You want to think of this like a bagpipe, where the bag is being blown into and then squeeze constantly to let out a constant stream of air. The pitch is instead changed by changing the throat, not by forcing more air out, which is just going to change the loudness of it. And only people who really hate the bagpipe would ever consider punching it to get a good sound out. Instead, it's being played with a constant squeeze. Now, in singing, what do you squeeze? Because again, we don't want to squeeze our abs because that's going to be forcing our air out. Instead, according to both Eric Arsenault and Justin Stoney, it shouldn't be your upper abs that are contracting. It should be a subtle contraction in your lower abs. But the advice isn't to just contract them to force your air out like you're coughing. Instead, to focus on holding that tension open and to keep your upper abs relaxed as you let it collapse. Now, this is diaphragmatic breathing, and again, in contrast to chest breathing, where your chest raises and out. You want your shoulders and chest to rise because that causes an additional weight. Chest breathing is used for something called belting, which is sing yelling. That is a stylistic choice and can damage your voice if not done properly, so it's considered a more advanced technique. So I'll leave that up to you to research on your own, but you at least have the search terms to get yourself started with. Now let's talk about probably the most famous singing exercise, which is lip trills. That's a lip trill. And you can add sound to it. And yes, you will get a ton of spit everywhere when you do this, but the idea is that it forces you to keep a constant stream of air out as you maintain your pitch. So your breath is working, and you're just focusing on keeping the tension in your throat correct. As such, it is a staple of voice training and is a good tool to diagnose any power problems or to check your breath while developing other muscles. And it can be a little bit hard to get at first, especially if you've never blown raspberries before or practiced any like beatboxing or stuff like that. So it requires a little bit of tension on the lips, but not too much. Some of the tips that I found are pretty good is that you can try the boots and cats, and get rid of the cats and just focus on the boots, and try to push as much air as you can out through that B sound and get a strong plosive, because that's what's pushing your lips apart. And then once you have that strong sound, boots, you can add a V sound or a VVV. So you can do a and that's going to help get to that. It will take a little bit of time at the beginning. So one tip that Verba Voca likes is to put your fingers on just the outside of your lips to add a little bit of tension to that. It can make it a little bit easier. And also, if you're having a really hard time, you can always just do puffed out cheeks with a constant stream of air pressure. Notice the constantly puffed out cheeks. And again, with any of these, you can add the pitches on top of them and you can do your scales up and down. So let's go ahead and try just doing a simple up and down as C major scale. Focusing on that belly breathing, feeling the air come in as you do so. Starting off here on the guys, here on the ladies. Ready? And now back down. Very nice. By the way, my favorite resource for singing is New York Singing Academy. I think Justin Stoney does a fantastic job. There's many lessons. And if you want singing practice, you can look to Verba Voca for that or Eric Arsenault. Both of them have fantastic lectures. So now you've got two exercises that you can use to start your foundational practice with singing, both pitch matching and those lip trills to work on your breath. But now let's talk about the throat, which is arguably the most complex part of singing. So there are four structures in your throat that you need to gain conscious and independent control over: your vocal cords, your larynx, your tongue, and your soft palate. Let's go over each one of them in detail. So the vocal cords are the pieces of tissue that actually vibrate to produce the sound. You can lengthen them to add tension and increase the pitch. You also can compress them together to control the breathiness or tension on the voice. You can get a feel for them by doing a siren or a slide up and down in pitch. So you do a ooh. That right there is lengthening your vocal cords. To get a feel of the compression, you can do a ha, ha. To go from the breathy sound to actually producing a sound, your vocal cords have to start coming together and vibrating. And that right there is compression. Your larynx is next, which you can feel if you place your hand on your throat. And it can raise up and down. If you swallow, it raises up. And if you yawn, it moves down. And gaining conscious control of this will control the brightness and the darkness of your sound. So if you have a low larynx, you have a very operatic dark sound. So oh. If you have a high larynx, it'll have a very bright sound to it, right? A good exercise to work on gaining control of this is to try to swallow or yawn and just hold it in that end position and not let it go back down. And see how long you can do that consciously. And see if you can do it without yawning then. Tongue is next, and I would say it's probably the most complicated one because there are two parts to it. There is the front of the tongue and the back of the tongue. But the good news is that you have good conscious control over these because you're used to producing them with certain vocal sounds. For example, with the back of the tongue, you actually can raise it up, down, push it forward, and back. And you might say, I've never done this before, but you have. If you produce an E sound, the back of your tongue is very high. Whereas if you produce an ah or an a sound, you're going to have a low back of the tongue. And again, the front and the back of the tongue can move independent of each other, each of them moving forward, backwards, up, and down. If you want to check out the full article in the description, I will have videos linked there that will show you how to do exercises for each one of these body parts. Now finally, we have the soft palate, which is what the uvula hangs down from. When it contracts, it controls your mouth or your head resonance. And if you place your fingers on the bridge of your nose right here, and you say sing, on the NG of sing, you're gonna feel the bridge of your nose vibrate. That's because your soft palate is going to lower down and allow the air to go up through your nose. You actually have good conscious control of this already. If you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, your soft palate went from being lowered to allow the air to go from your nose down to your lungs, to being raised to allow that same air to go out through your mouth. That's going on in the back of your throat, and that's what allows you to control the direction of airflow. And this controls how nasal or sharp your sound is. So there are exercises you can do to develop conscious control over each one of these body parts while you're singing. And I'll link videos in the article below that go over all of these in more depth. But the goal that you should have is to develop conscious control over each of the actions of these body parts in isolation while you work on your pitch control. And this will unlock an awareness and control over how your voice is working, allowing you to add stylistic choices to your songs and fix problem areas. The other thing that I want to talk about is what's going on with the rest of your body. And this is where something called the Alexander technique is going to come in. Now, it is an in-depth technique, and this is usually something that is associated with acting, because the whole idea is that you find a neutral position in your body that has no tension, and then you can add tension where a character would. But I think that this is also very relevant for singing. And you can find a nice video linked in that article below that's going to give you an introduction to that technique. In general, it is all about finding a nice aligned spine, pushing through the ground, figuring out how you have slight imbalances, and then correcting them. So let's go ahead and do one more muscular control exercise that you might do with your throat. What we're going to be doing is doing a simple E, ah, and we're going to slide in between those, trying to make it as subtle as possible. This is going to gain control over our tongue position. So if we do a try to make that as subtle as possible. Even there, I had some breaks. So let me try that again. A lot of conscious control. You also might find that you didn't even realize that all this stuff was going on in the back of your throat. So you might be wondering, Jake, this is all well and good. It makes sense. I'm learning how to be on pitch. Muscular control makes sense to be able to adjust all of these parts of my throat, to be able to control what sound is coming out. Sounds great, but when are we going to start singing songs and sounding pretty? And that's what voicing control is all about. It's about how to make our voice sound good. It's about controlling our timbre rather than our pitch. Timbre, or the unique color or character of your voice, is what differentiates your voice from your mother's voice or your friend's voice. It's also what differentiates a guitar playing a D sound from a piano playing the same D sound. With your eyes closed, you would be able to tell which one I'm playing. Now, looking at the commonalities between the dozen or so singing instructors on YouTube, singing is all about learning how to gain control over your musculature to gain a strong, neutral, healthy sound for yourself, and then you can add touches of stylistic flair on top of that to control your sound. So a lot of this work is going to be beginning on the vowel placement, and sound to be right. Ken Tamplin recommends his singers to practice the song with just the vowels first, and getting those to sound good, and then bring in the consonants, as the vowels are the things that you're going to be sustaining. Now, what do I mean by placement? Well, an example of this would be being able to sing all the vowels by repeatedly closing and pinching your nose shut to be able to tell if they're going through your mouth or through your nose. Not to say that one is better than the other, as it can be a stylistic choice, but it is a test to see where the placement is. For example, A, E, I, O, U versus A, E, I, O, U. See the difference? That's what I mean by placement, where the sound is resonating in your body. And these different points of resonance are what are referred to as registers. What are the different registers that you have access to while you're singing? Well, there are three main ones that we're going to be concerned about: your chest voice, your head voice, and your mix. So if you place your hand on your chest right here and you talk, you should feel it vibrating, especially if you maintain a note or a nice ooh. You're going to feel your chest slightly vibrating. Whereas if you place your hand on your head, ooh, you're going to feel less vibration. Now, if you slide your pitch up to the very top and talk up there, ooh, and eventually you're going to go up here into your head voice. And you're going to feel very less vibration down here in your chest and more vibration up here in your head. Now, one thing that a lot of people get confused on is head voice versus falsetto. The difference is the level of compression on the vocal cords. Falsetto is a very breathy sound, like this, versus head voice, which is a very compressed sound, like this. Go back to that slide between your chest voice and your head voice. There was a mix that you went through where you're using a little bit of chest voice and a little bit of head voice. The mix is that gradient between the black and the white. It's all the shades of gray that are possible between that. So it's not just one target to aim for, but a sense of control throughout your entire pitch range. And having a strong mix is what gives professional singers a certain lightness and freedom to their voice, but also a strong power and flexibility and control. According to Justin Stoney, this is where the majority of singers spend their time. Now, your muscular and pitch control will help you develop this, but playing around with the tone in real songs by sliding between them smoothly is the most important aspect of voice control. Also, because this is the ultimate beginner's guide, I do want to mention that there are other registers like whistle voice for the extremely high notes, vocal fry, which is where your vocal cords are just clicking together like that, and belting, which is sing yelling. Hey! So we have these different registers and you have the mix of sliding between them smoothly. And you can use your muscular control to add different levels of stylistic flair because you can do the same thing with a raised or a lowered larynx as you do that pitch slide up and down. And that is also going to change the sound that's coming out of your throat. Some stylistic choices are defined by the genre. For example, opera has a very low larynx as you sing these operatic notes, whereas something like a pop or a rock sound has a very high larynx up here. Hey there, Delilah, what's it like in New York City? Versus, hey there, Delilah, what's it like in New York City? Sounds a little silly, right? So there are a lot of different exercises that you can do to work on your vocal register, and I will link all of them in the article below. But I want to touch on one other vocal control exercise that I feel is probably the most important, and one that I don't see too many singing instructors talk about, which is voice impressions. If anything, they probably caution you against it, but I want to talk about why I feel it is so important. They're all about finding your unique voice, and I think there's a grain of truth in that, but I also feel that there's a grain of truth in that you can't be a great unless you've studied the greats. For example, if I'm learning how to play a cover on guitar, I could just look up what the chords are, and I could just do down strums in between them. And I would technically be playing the song. But it would be much better if I learned how to do some sort of stylistic flourish on them. And that's still different than... That's still different than... But to understand which one of those is good, it requires playing around, and I think that you can save a lot of time by playing like the greats. You can only pick up certain elements by listening to the song and trying to imitate it. By listening closely to a song and paying attention to the subtle details of what they're doing, that's how you go from average to extraordinary. That's that X factor. And it comes from listening to, understanding, and then being able to replicate what they're doing. Practicing those subtle details like rhythms or extra flourishes that they play. And sure, I might come up with my own sound by playing like that. But how can you create a masterpiece if you haven't studied the masters? At least on some level. To quote Da Vinci, he who can go to the fountain does not go to the water jar. You're not going to be looking up tutorials on how to sing the certain thing if you can just listen to the song and be able to say, oh, that's what they're doing, let me try to do that. And I think that that's a critical practice to develop early. So let's go ahead and take an example of this. So there's a lot of things that you can pick out with his voice. Let's go ahead and take... So notice that he has that man with a lot of vibrato, and then he flourishes up in the end to a falsetto almost. Man. Wait for man. So let's go ahead and take that "your" right there, okay? So that "your" right there, that's an example of a stylistic flourish that he adds on top of that, and that's something that you could do a singing impression with. Now, he almost, if I do this, I'm gonna crack. I'm saying this is above my level, and this is something that I'd be actually working on. So if you want to hear what I'm working on right now, notice that he did a "your face." So he has a certain fall there, and he almost goes through a falsetto. If you listen to that again. I saw your face. So just being able to do this over and over again and trying to get it to sound right as you record yourself and listen to it is, I think, a quality way to spend your time while you're singing, especially at the later stages, or if you have a song that you particularly care about. Your face, I saw your face, your face. And honestly, it might not sound the same, and it doesn't need to sound the same. It doesn't even need to sound close to it, but trying to do the impression that's like it is what the exercise is all about. And as you get better over time, you're going to be able to pick out these subtle details, break them down to smaller parts, and then be able to get them quicker and quicker. And that right there is what's going to turn you from an okay singer to an amazing singer. And it's okay that my voice is cracking while this is going on, or that I'm sounding ridiculous. We'll talk about more how singing should feel in a second, but know that you're going to sound ludicrous and insane while you're doing these squawking and screaming. You're going to have tension in your throat. There's going to be breaks and cracks, and that's all part of it. If you don't have any risk, then you aren't going to have any gain. We don't have any pain, but there's that saying, no pain, no gain. If there's no emotional pain of going, oh, I worry if anyone's going to hear that, then you're never going to get the gain, because you can't get a pretty sound without sounding really ugly and figuring out how to not do those ugly sounds. That's what singing's all about. So I'll be doing that. I'll be, of course, monitoring my progress by recording myself, listening back and saying, do I like this? How could I change it? Which version do I like best? And it's seriously breaking it down to that minute details. I also could look at articulation and prosody. So articulation is how specific sounds are enunciated. For example, in butter, Americans pronounce it with a D, whereas British pronounce it with a T. So the butter is butter in British English, whereas in American English, it's butter with a D. Butter. You can hear a good example of this with Ed Sheeran. Whenever he sings, he always has a British accent because he's British. Prosody is another aspect for just any term that's not encapsulated in the voice. It's all the other performing elements, like maybe their stage presence or the way that they carry themselves or some other sort of like head roll if they do, or flourish, or any other thing that makes them unique. And you can look at that as well, and you can imitate that. I don't think there's anything wrong with imitation at any level. I think that as long as you properly attribute your sources and never claim them to be original, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't worry about copying others, because you will naturally have yourself shine through. So I want to take a quick tangent here and just say that by learning how to sing and change your voice with the musculature, you also are going to be able to do fantastic character impressions, and that can be a fun and synergistic side practice. New York Vocal Academy, which at this point, this is just a big ad for New York Singing Academy, as it should be. They've helped me out so much. But they've got a whole character breakdown series that uses this exact same system to do character impressions. So what parts of the throat need to be controlled to get a certain sound, like Mickey Mouse. So you could have a ton of fun doing this, guys. I want to say that this is a playful part of singing. The goal here is to get in control over your voice so you can have fun on it at any level. It requires listening very closely to incredibly small details of the way that someone speaks or listens, and then to what you're doing with your own voice and being comfortable with that, and then trying to explore, expand, and strengthen it. It's going to require practicing the same line thousands of times, changing the position of your vocal cords in subtle ways, the larynx, the tongue, all of these, balancing the tension out to figure out exactly how to get the right sound. And there's going to be so much cracking and squeaking and squabbling in the way. I could be listening to things exactly as I wish they would sound and then do it myself and go, that's not right, for months, years on end. And that's what getting better at singing is all about. I want you to remember that this is an endless process where the only thing that you should focus on is having fun. Because if you focus on that end goal of, I'm going to be a fantastic singer and then I can do this one song and all this other stuff, you're going to lose the journey that's along the way and you won't have fun today. So you're going to lose that motivation. Learn how to have fun today in your singing practice by matching the pitch, by doing a make yourself smile. So let's go ahead and finish things up with how should singing feel. But before we do that, I just want to say there's plenty more that I could talk about if you'd like to. And my goal is that we can create a ultimate beginner's guide that allows anyone to learn how to sing and develop their voice with a system that takes them from beginner to feeling competent. And if you can contribute any sources or resources or thoughts, then please do in the comments below. So let's go ahead and finish up with how should singing feel. I'm going to focus on getting a clear sound with the minimal effort that's required. This is a lot like in guitar, how we want to have the minimal effort that's required to hold a note. So I could play a note with my finger being death pressed against it, and it sounds clear. Or I can go death press and then release the tension until I start getting any slight buzzing right there, and then I can go for just the smallest amount of tension. That way I don't fatigue my fingers, and I can still get a nice, clear, crystal sound. Experts are pressing a lot lighter on the strings than their novice counterparts. And the same is true for voice. That's why expert singers, when they talk about it, they say there's a feeling of lightness, of freedom. And that's exactly what we're going for, but there's probably not going to go through that at the beginning. So let's talk about just what we want to avoid. If you're ever feeling a hurt in your throat, a strain or scratchy feeling, then you're going to want to back off. We aren't looking for any sort of tightness or constriction or anything like that unless we're going for that sort of character sound. But no matter what, there shouldn't be any sort of pain. The other thing to remember is that you're going to have to sound ugly and be incredibly comfortable with that to figure out how to sound pretty. And there's going to be a lot of ugly exercises that you're going to do that are going to be embarrassing. But remember the quote that the master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. So the only way that you can learn how to sing fantastically is by learning how to not do all the ugly sounds. How can you tell if you're singing strained? Well, it's caused by friction in the cords, and you want to look for muscles in the throat tensing up, shoulders rising, tightening your jaw, tilting your head back, feeling like you're going against something or pushing that sound out. Instead, it should feel like you're supported, like it's falling out effortlessly. You aren't yelling or singing. There's a certain level of brilliance to it. Now, I will also say that there's going to be a natural tendency that you will add tension to it, and your goal is just to back that off, to learn how to control that tension and to work in a comfortable range and slowly expand that over time where you have a comfortable level of exercise to your voice. Some tips to monitor how you're sounding and if you're straining is to sing with your hands in front of your ears like this so you can hear the room ambience rather than just the sound that's coming out of your mouth. You can go ahead and feel that difference right there if you just try doing like that. Or you also can sing in front of a mirror to see if you're adding any strain to it. You catch that all the time that I go, wait, I'm sticking my head out. Did I get the high notes? Bring it back down. So with that, I hope that there is a solid foundation for you to start your singing practice. What I would recommend as far as how to structure this whole thing, well, I'm going to recommend the same structure that was recommended for guitar practice. And I think works really well. I like it a lot. Where if we have an hour of practice our singing, we divide that into 4 15-minute blocks. And the idea is that you have different activities that you can put into each one of those blocks to keep yourself focused. But you can swap them out every single day for something new. The only catch is that you can't go more than 2 days without doing an activity. And that 2-day requirement means that you aren't going to skip out on something that you know is important, but you just never practice. So for example, you might have one 15-minute block where you're just focusing on pitch matching on a melody. You might have another 15-minute block where you're focusing on your muscular control, keeping your larynx down as you sing these high notes up here. Or whatever it is. You might have another 15-minute block where you're focusing on sliding between your falsetto, your mixed voice, and your chest voice. You might have another 15-minute block where you're focusing on those voice impressions, or just singing a song, or just listening to recordings of yourself and looking for areas that you can improve. Or maybe talking with a vocal instructor. Any one of those could fit into your singing practice time. And the only requirement is that you just make sure that you don't go more than 2 days without practicing any one of them. If you didn't get that, I'll link a video that explains that in more detail. But this should be enough for you to get started practicing. If I had to make a recommendation for an absolute beginner who feels like they're tone deaf right now and can't sing at all, I would say focus just for 15 minutes. Don't start off with an hour practice, just for 15 minutes on pitch matching. If you're a little bit more advanced and you want to devote that full hour as the beginner, spend 15 minutes on learning your pitch control and then translating that to a melody of a song that you want to be able to sing. Then spend 15 minutes working on your larynx control, as that's generally a new muscle for a lot of people and they don't have a lot of conscious control over that. And then spend 15 minutes focusing on doing a mixed voice practice or a head voice practice, depending on which one you feel less comfortable with. Most people are pretty comfortable in their chest voice. And then spend 15 minutes focusing on a song that you want to be able to sing and just singing that and listening to a recording of yourself. That right there is a fantastic beginner's practice. And I think that that right there is the ultimate way to get started. Hopefully you've gotten a lot out of this. This is the video that I wish that somebody had told me 2 years ago. These are all the different things that you can learn. And I don't want you to get overwhelmed with it. Instead, I want you to focus on just finding that joyful noise. So this has been Get Skills' Ultimate Beginner Guide to Improving Your Singing. And as always, thanks for getting better.